means that you now need to work for the next 30 years to pay this off. It's locked. It doesn't give you freedom. You're paying roughly about 1.65 to 1.85. The difference that I'm chasing is freedom. Here's why I don't believe in the Australian dream. Buying a house with a 30-year mortgage, retiring when you're 65 years old, working for about 90% of your adult life. This is what I believe in, rentvesting. And here's why. Guys, before we just jump into the video, quick message from me. 83% of my viewers are not subscribed. As I've mentioned before, we're a small channel trying to grow. If you could like, subscribe, comment, it'd really be appreciated. And now we'll shoot back to the content. So I'm going to give you two examples, and I'm going to actually relate it back to myself for an example. One thing I do want to start off saying, this is my opinion. It's certainly not financial advice, and I definitely do not think for 1 second that this works for everyone. For my whole adult life, I've had people ask me why I don't own a property, and I have in the past, and why I rent my current house. I think a lot of people, particularly in Australia, I'm not sure if it's the case worldwide, but particularly in Australia, see wealth as the property you own, whereas I've never really viewed it like that. And this is why. Example one, you've saved up $100,000. Now you want to buy $1 million home. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind when you're buying a home and when you're actually evaluating how much money your property has made when you sell it. You buy a house, you put $100,000, you've saved up $100,000 that may have taken you a few years to do. It's your whole life savings. You're now putting your whole life savings in this $1 million home. Now, this $1 million home may not be your dream home. Most likely, particularly in Melbourne, I know in Sydney, in New York, in LA, and many cities across the world, that $1 million home is not going to buy you your dream home. You're then going to have to put money down into it further on to renovate it into the house you want. Let's just say for this example, we'll continue on. So you've got stamp duty, you've got transfers fees, you've got land tax if it's an investment or a vacant land. So if it's an established house, you don't have land tax, but it is something to keep in mind. You've got legal fees and you've got LMI, 1 to 5%. This is the example on what it actually looks like. $1 million home, the stamp duty. So you put your 100,000 in there. Your $100,000 basically just covers all the tax. So you're paying LMI, $44,000 roughly. These are all rough numbers, by the way. You're paying stamp duty, $55,000. You're paying government fees, about $2,500. So what does that look like over a 30-year mortgage? How much interest are you actually paying over 30 years? So a $900,000 loan over 30 years, roughly, with about a 5.5, 6.5% interest rate, which is current in Australia. You're paying from the 900,000 roughly about 1.65 to 1.85 over a 30-year period. That basically equates to roughly $24,000 of interest per year. What happens when you're buying a house is you're locking all your equity into one asset. It's locked. It is no longer an asset. It becomes a liability, because in this house, you need to continually repair it. You need to do a hot water system breaks down. You're putting money into it. It becomes a liability because it's not spitting out money. You're building your equity within the house. Yes, absolutely. And particularly in Australia, I certainly don't think that we're going to see the growth rates that we once perhaps saw in the 70s, 80s through the 90s. But, you know, typically they say roughly your house will double in value over 10 years. One thing that it doesn't do is spit out money. It doesn't have tax benefits. If you're living in the home, there is no way to benefit tax-wise from your house when you live in a home. There are obviously many ways to do it. I'm just talking about owner-occupier in this case. When you're selling the house and you make money, you really need to consider, have I covered all these costs? Have I covered the $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 of interest? Have I covered all this stamp duty before you make money? That's the real true value of the business. It doesn't give you freedom. There's no freedom in this. When you're locked into a mortgage, it means that you now need to work for the next 30 years to pay this off. Secondly, I'm giving you an example for myself. So when I was younger, I definitely did. I had a house. I had 2 residential properties, investment properties, and I had a commercial property in Dandenong. Now, don't get me wrong, they all had varying levels of success. I think the best one was probably the factory that I owned. I actually owned and operated my business from a commercial factory. That did very well, 100%. The other 2 properties, you know, I didn't really walk away with that much money once you took in consideration all these things. What I would invest, and again, this really does depend on the type of person. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're someone that potentially wants to get into business, if you're someone who thinks outside the box, it doesn't necessarily have to be business. You can invest in whatever. You can invest in Bitcoin. You can invest in whatever it is that you want to invest in. In my case, it was always going to be business. The difference that I'm chasing is freedom. Time is money. I'm trying to buy time. essentially was what I was trying to do. Really in the peak of buying their properties between 25 and 35, I was renting and I was using all the money that I had to put into the businesses. Now, the difference between a business and a property is a business is an asset. It's an asset that in the sense of it spits out money. It covers this asset. The business should generate money to cover any loans. When you have a mortgage, you're the person that needs to generate the money. When you have a loan through a business, the asset does it. So for instance, in my case, the car wash. I bought the car wash. I took loans of up to say $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 to upgrade that business. That car wash generates enough money to pay off the loans. Essentially is building wealth. You're building your assets, but from the business. At the same time that I was increasing the value of the car wash, it was spitting out dividends. Throughout the whole 4 years, it was spitting out dividends to me. And what was it doing? It was generating time. It was building time. It was buying time for me. It allowed me more freedom. It gave me time to spend more time with my kids. And what renting does, as opposed to buying, is this gives you ultimate freedom. You get to live where you want. In my case, the property that I rent would be about $2 million to buy outright. Now, if you look at that property, $2 million to buy, it would probably be sort of around the 10,000 K mark per month. I'm renting it, but it's about $5,000 a month. That means that I'm saving $5,000 every month by living in a house that I like, that I enjoy in a suburb that I want to. I'm not compromising and moving out. I live in central Melbourne and I'm saving $5,000 a month by doing that. And what am I doing with that $5,000 a month? Well, you got to think I've been renting now for 20 years. That's a lot of money that I've saved. It's also given me the ultimate flexibility in terms of I've moved around in my time to find the suburb. I don't just buy a house and just live there forever. I've sort of lived all across Melbourne until now I've found a house where I sort of enjoy the area. But what you can do, the difference between business, as I said, and property is a business, there are tax benefits. With a property, you put your money in and that's really all you can do. With a business, you can increase its value. So a lot of my businesses, in fact, all the businesses that I have all increased in value over the time. So I've bought the business, I've used the business to borrow money. The business has paid off that debt to increase the value of these businesses. It is spitting out dividends while I'm doing this. And then the tax benefits of it. Obviously with a house, with a business, you can claim a lot of works. If you're upgrading, if you're doing a renovation on your house to improve it, not only are you going to get capital gains when you sell it, but you're going to get taxed on it. When you do a capital improvement on your business, it's all tax benefits. It comes off your profits. If you're spending $100,000 on improving your facility, then $100,000 of loss will come off your profit and you'll pay less tax. Also, when you're profitable in a business, if you're lucky to have a profitable business, you can set up family trusts and I can disperse the profits the way I see fit to save money. So the way that looks basically is if a business makes $100,000, I then send that to a family trust, and that family trust can be split up in people in my family. You may have an 18-year-old son, a 17-year-old daughter that's not working. You can disperse your money to your son's daughter's wife and save on tax. Obviously, those kids won't be earning anything. They'll pay a lower tax rate. You don't get to do that when you own a house. Business is more liquid. It's more liquid. It's easier to move your money around. When you own a house, it makes it difficult. Yes, you can borrow off equity, but it's going to put pressure on your serviceability. It builds more freedom. That's probably the main point that I've been trying to prove. This really locks you into a 30-year, you can sell it anytime, but you've got to be careful with how much money you've sort of paid up front to cover it. Business does give you the ultimate freedom. Obviously, this isn't, as I've stated from the start, this certainly isn't for everyone, but I guess it's more so I have a lot of people asking me why I don't own a home. And I'm hoping that hopefully this helps explain why I don't own a home. Now, do I have thoughts of buying a home? 100% I do, but I'm going to do it back to front, because what people tend to do when they buy a home is they do it the other way around. So I'm trying to create business to create cash flow, trying to create more and more cash flow. What does cash flow do? It obviously increases your freedom. But obviously when I get to a certain point where I'm really happy with my cash flow, I've been sort of working on my cash flow now for 20 years, and that's increasing my business and increasing your investing. However you want to increase your cash flow. And then to a point where I'm satisfied with my cash flow, I've got enough passive, not so much passive, but passive style businesses spitting out dividends, the cash flow, I will then buy a house when I can service that property. It doesn't put any pressure on me. I can perhaps pay a lot more, a much larger deposit up front, and take that pressure off having any sort of 30-year mortgage. But I guess at that point, I have a lot of freedom from my businesses. The businesses are not only spitting out dividends to me, but they're also paying for the property that I want to live in. And still, to be honest, my plan right now is to continue renting. I will, in the next few years, buy a home, but I probably won't live in it, because it's better tax benefits for me to have it as an Airbnb house and use it as a holiday home, for instance. I do enjoy the freedom of having potentially 2 different locations, good for the weekends away and so forth. So if you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know. I'd love to answer some of your questions if you have it. If you agree with me, disagree with me, whatever, just let me know what you think. Thank you. On Saturday, I felt the best I've ever felt in my life.
My name is 𝐶𝐨𝐧'𝐭.
First time.
It's just a little special treat.